Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Science. You find yourself in a quiet room, lights low, the air just cool enough to make the blankets inviting. Outside, a breeze rustles through late summer leaves, and somewhere in the distance a train hums along its track like a lullaby from another century. But here, right now, you're about to sink into something far older than the train, older than the trees, older than you, though you're part of it too. It's in your breath, in your bones, in your oatmeal and your favourite hoodie. This is carbon, and you probably won't survive this journey, not because it's dangerous, but because no one really does. Carbon's cycle moves far slower than we live, looping patiently through time while we come and go in a blink. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a dense bog, imaginary of course, soft and cool against your skin. You exhale, and there it is, carbon dioxide drifting invisibly into the air. It came from your lunch, which came from plants, which got their carbon from the air. That same carbon could have once been part of a stegosaurus or the trunk of a Neolithic tree, or even a hunk of coal warming Queen Victoria's palace. It's all borrowed. You're just the latest stop on carbon's endless commute. You breathe it out without noticing, but let's slow down and zoom in. Inside your lungs, oxygen binds to carbon-rich molecules that came from that granola bar you ate 3 hours ago. Your cells break those molecules down in little sparkles of biochemical energy, and the waste, carbon dioxide, rides your breath like a hitchhiker catching a ride to the sky. Gone in a puff, right? Not quite. It's about to start the whole dance again. Some of that CO2 might hover near the ceiling for a bit. Some may float out your open window, get caught in an air current, and drift off toward the trees lining the street. A lucky molecule might pass into a leaf's tiny pore, called a stoma, which sounds like a soft drink brand but is far less fun, and get whisked away into the green machinery of photosynthesis. You've just carbon-mailed your waste to a chloroplast, and it's already being recycled into something else. Historians still argue whether ancient civilizations understood this great invisible exchange happening around them, or if they just took the air for granted. Either way, you're part of a cycle that began before the first human heartbeat. Every carbon atom in your body is billions of years old, forged in the fiery heart of a star that exploded before Earth even cooled enough to wear oceans. Think about that. The carbon in your kneecap? Stardust. The carbon in that tiny mole on your arm? Also stardust. If your body were an orchestra, carbon would be the cello section, deep, steady and quietly essential. Not the flashy lead violin like oxygen or the percussion of sodium zipping around, but the backbone that binds proteins, powers sugars, and keeps everything tethered to reality. And here's a fun little trivia snack. Humans are about 18.5% carbon by mass. So if you weigh 150 pounds, roughly 28 pounds of yo is pure carbon. That's about the weight of a medium-sized beagle, if you prefer your science facts with a side of adorable. But carbon doesn't like to sit still. It's a traveller, a shapeshifter. In the air it floats as CO2. In your muscles, it curls into protein chains. In plants, it becomes glucose. In rocks, it becomes ancient whispers locked away in limestone. And occasionally, when things get weird, it becomes diamond. Yes, the exact same element that props up your mitochondria can also sparkle on someone's ring finger, if it's crushed and heated for a few million years under absurdly dramatic pressure. Of course, carbon's journey is not all romance and glamour. Sometimes it takes a detour through a cow's digestive tract and exits in the form of methane burps. Sometimes it gets trapped in a plastic spoon that lives in a landfill for centuries. And sometimes, brace yourself, it escapes from an exhaust pipe in the middle of rush hour traffic and just floats around, bumping into birds, trees and joggers. Fringe theories even suggest that ancient carbon exchanges might have shaped early life in ways we still don't fully grasp. Some researchers propose that early life forms, rather than using oxygen, relied on simpler carbon-based cycles deep in the ocean's hydrothermal vents, like bubbling cauldrons of prebiotic soup. If true, it would mean carbon was the original life coach, nudging evolution toward complexity before photosynthesis ever lit the party candles. The thing is, you don't have to do anything for this story to continue. You're already in it. Every snack you eat, every breath you take, Every leaf that shades your walk home is a scene in this slow-motion, planet-sized ballet. Whether you're composting like a backyard eco-warrior or throwing fast food wrappers into the abyss of your back seat, you're part of the carbon story. You are, quite literally, animated carbon. And yet you almost never see it. You rarely touch it. It doesn't glow or make a sound, it just is. And that makes it perfect for sleepy science. There's no rush. The carbon that left your lungs a minute ago might end up in a sunflower next year, or in a coral reef in 5 decades, or in a fossil fuel deposit buried under a rainforest in a few million years. Carbon plays the long game. You, meanwhile, just need to exhale. You're floating now, not in air, not in water, but in the quiet abyss where atoms are born. It's cold, impossibly vast, and silent in a way that presses into your ears. And far above, a star shudders. It collapses, then erupts in a supernova so bright it punches through space-time like a god flicking on a flashlight. That explosion isn't chaos, it's chemistry. In its dying breath, that star crafts carbon, along with other elements too heavy to be born in anything gentler. And just like that, you've arrived at the beginning. Carbon doesn't start on Earth. It doesn't even start in the solar system. It's built in stars, assembled under pressure and heat that makes every volcano on Earth look like a birthday candle. Once the explosion fades, the carbon drifts through space in tiny grains, particles of potential. For millions of years it wanders. Some atoms hitch a ride on a forming planet, maybe a molten Earth still bubbling with sulfur and promise, and others hang back, waiting, watching, but eventually a few of those carbon atoms settle down in a young blue planet and get to work becoming life. You might be surprised to know that carbon's earliest role wasn't in plants or people, but in rocks. When Earth was just a hot mess of lava and meteor impacts, carbon settled into minerals, tucked into graphite, carbonate, and, on rare, ridiculous occasions, diamonds. Not the shiny kind you see in jewellery ads, but rough ancient chunks of crystal, hiding in the deepest parts of the crust. Some are still there, trapped so far below the surface you'd need a drill team, a PhD, and probably a few bad decisions to reach them. Historians still argue whether early humans ever recognised carbon for what it was. They certainly used charcoal, a form of nearly pure carbon, for heat and art. The cave paintings at Chauvet and Lascaux, probably drawn with carbon scraped from the bottom of a fire pit. They didn't know the word element, or the atomic number 6, but they knew that black stuff made marks, and fire, and marks plus fire meant magic, or at least dinner and storytelling. You step carefully now into a patch of forest soil. The leaves crackle gently underfoot. Somewhere nearby a mushroom is blooming in slow motion, its cap uncurling like a paper lantern. And in that mushroom, and the dirt beneath it, carbon is alive. Not alive like you, carbon isn't self-aware, but alive in the sense that it builds and moves through everything. Carbon doesn't just support life, it enables it. No carbon, no cells, no DNA, no pizza. It's one of the only elements capable of forming long, complex chains, like the ones in sugars, proteins, fats, and your most regrettable middle school memories. Silicon tries to compete sometimes. Science fiction writers love imagining silicon-based aliens. But down here, carbon wins every time. Here's a quirky fact for your collection. Carbon exists in more forms than most elements ever dream of. It can be soft and black like graphite, hard and transparent like diamond, or even rolled into a cylinder like a carbon nanotube. A structure so strong and weirdly futuristic it sounds like it was made by tiny robot spiders. Spoiler, no spiders, just chemistry. By now your sense of scale is starting to melt. You were floating in stardust a moment ago, and now you're peering into molecules that make up your breakfast. That's what carbon does. It bridges the incomprehensible vastness of space with the microscopic hum of life. One atom might have spent millions of years trapped in limestone before getting released by a rumbling volcano. Another might have danced through the bloodstream of a T-Rex, then waited patiently in a fossil until some oil rig dug it up for plastic. And the bones of this story stretch deep underground. You pause for a moment in a coal seam, ancient, silent and pressurized into a time capsule of prehistoric forests. Each black layer is like a page in Earth's journal. Trees, ferns, even dragonflies the size of dinner plates, all reduced to carbon-rich seams. That's where we got the term carboniferous. a whole geologic period named for its insane carbon storage. It was a good time for bugs, not so much for breathable air. You move slowly now, dusting the soot from your hands, following a carbon atom as it moves from ancient stone to modern soil. It's in everything. Charcoal drawings, chalk cliffs, diamonds, fossil fuels, sourdough starters. It forms the skeletons of corals and the sweetness of a ripe fig. You're starting to realise that carbon isn't just around you, it is you. Not in a poetic, we are the world kind of way, but in the very real, very literal sense that you are made from it. And just to keep things grounded, here's something to giggle at. In 2004, scientists discovered fullerenes, spherical carbon molecules shaped like tiny soccer balls. They named them buckyballs after Buckminster Fuller, because apparently science has a sense of humour tucked under all those lab coats. You lean back now, still in that forest, still under those stars, and feel the calm of carbon's long memory. It was here before you, and it'll be here after. Not judging, just cycling. The great balancer. You're a chapter in its story, but it's the spine of the book. You could burn every fossil, plant 1 trillion trees, or bottle it up in industrial tanks. It won't be rushed. Carbon always finds its way back into motion. The stardust settles, the fog fades. You breathe out slowly, letting your carbon trail weave into the air like a message only the planet understands. No need to chase it. It knows where to go. You slip now into the stillness of morning light filtering through a leaf. Quiet, gentle, green. But not just green. There's more happening in that chlorophyll-coated surface than your eyes could ever catch. You're on the underside of a single leaf, somewhere in a sprawling forest or maybe just your backyard basil plant. And you've shrunk yourself small enough to see the stomata again. Those tiny blinking mouths drinking carbon from the air. It's here, in the lush factory of the chloroplast, that one of the greatest tricks in Earth's history takes place, photosynthesis. You slide down into the soft, jelly-like interior of a plant cell surrounded by chloroplasts humming like miniature solar panels. The plant is relaxed. It doesn't hustle. It takes its time soaking up sunlight, drawing in carbon dioxide, and slowly building sugar out of light and air like some kind of cosmic baker with a perpetual oven. Carbon molecules drift in, escorted by enzymes, and join forces with hydrogen from water and energy from the sun, and the result? Glucose, sweet, simple sugar. And oxygen, exhaled by the plant as a byproduct, as if it's saying, here, you might find this useful. This is where your breakfast really began, not in a grocery store or a farm, but right here in the green hum of photosynthesis. That apple, that slice of toast, that sad desk salad, you half finished last Tuesday, all of them built from carbon pulled out of the air by a plant like this. And when you eat them, the cycle turns again. You're not just a person, you're a mobile carbon redistribution unit. Charming, right? Historians still argue whether early human societies realised just how dependent they were on plants, not just for food and shelter, but for breathing itself. Some ancient myths, like those from the Haudenosaunee or certain Polynesian cultures, come remarkably close to describing trees as sacred life-givers. In some origin stories, humans are shaped from soil or wood, not because it's poetic, but perhaps because it's chemically accurate. Plants make carbon edible. Without that, you'd be chewing on rocks and hopes. And here's a quirky aside for your trivia brain. The first person to understand that plants actually eat air was Jan Baptist van Helmont, a 17th century Flemish chemist. He planted a willow tree in a pot, gave it only water for 5 years, and noticed the soil barely changed while the tree grew massively. His conclusion? The tree grew from water. Close, but not quite. He missed that the rest of it came from the invisible carbon drifting through the air. A good first draft, Jan, will give you a B+. Back inside the chloroplasts, the Calvin cycle is spinning along, patient and rhythmic. This quiet sequence of chemical steps takes carbon and energy and slowly builds bigger molecules, sugars that will move through the plant like currency. Some of it becomes cellulose, helping the plant grow, some becomes starch, stored away like winter savings, and some eventually becomes the building blocks for fruit, grain or leaves that fall in your path and crunch underfoot like paper. You pause now to look around, really look, and see just how many leaves are doing this at once. Every single blade of grass, every towering oak, every cactus and fern and sprig of rosemary in your grandmother's windowsill. Each one is a miniature carbon collecting machine, all working without complaint, without salary, without even moving, just slowly, steadily sucking in CO2 and tucking the carbon away in forms we can eat, wear or climb. Photosynthesis doesn't just feed you, it regulates the entire planet. It pulls down around 20 billion metric tons of carbon from the atmosphere each year. That's 120 billion tons of gas turned into food and wood and flowers. Think of it like the Earth's quiet vacuum cleaner, sweeping the air every day, leaf by leaf. And without it, the planet would suffocate in its own breath. The strange twist here is that plants aren't doing this out of generosity. They don't care about you, they're just trying to grow, to survive, to pass on their chlorophyll-coded wisdom to the next generation. You're the accidental beneficiary of an ancient arms race between sunlight and chemistry. It's beautiful. It's also a little humbling. And while we're on the topic of humility, remember this. The oxygen you breathe is the waste product. Plants don't mean to make it. They're exhaling their leftovers, and you're the weird animal that learned to inhale it. So the next time you're out in nature thanking the trees, remember, they don't even know you exist. Back to our cycle. Once the carbon becomes sugar, it doesn't just sit there. The plant might use it immediately, sending it to growing cells or packing it away in roots or fruits. Or if you're lucky and hungry, a human or animal will come along and eat it. That carbon ends up in stomachs, in cells, and eventually in you. You are once again composed of carbon that was airborne not long ago. You're basically held together by old sunbeams and the breath of the plants. Of course, this doesn't mean the carbon is locked away forever. Far from it. The second that plant cell burns energy or breaks down sugar for its own use, yes, plants respire too, that carbon gets released again. A little puff of CO2 out through the stomata and back into the air. The cycle never sleeps. There's an almost poetic paradox in this. The more life spreads, the more carbon flows. You'd think growth would trap carbon away, but in fact it sets it in motion. Every flower blooming, every berry ripening, every mossy stone in a shady forest, all of them are running this quiet, elegant exchange. Pull carbon in, use it, let it go, like a breath that never ends. Some scholars argue whether Earth has reached the maximum possible rate of photosynthesis globally. With forests being cut and oceans warming, the capacity might be shrinking. Others believe plants are adapting fast enough to keep pace. The debate's still open, like most good mysteries. But the bottom line remains. Photosynthesis is the backbone of the carbon cycle. It is the original green miracle, and without it, you'd be nothing but dust and good intentions. So as you drift in this green-tinted stillness, let yourself be amazed, not by the complexity, but by the calm repetition. Carbon in, sugar made, oxygen out, again and again for billions of years. No need for applause. The plants are already at work on tomorrow. The green fades behind you now as you follow carbon into a darker place. Not ominous, just intimate. You drift through the warm corridors of your own body, deeper than bones, down into your cells, until you're standing at the very threshold of life's furnace, the mitochondria. Tiny bean-shaped organelles humming with heatless fire. Here, the sugar built by photosynthesis comes to be burned, not with flames, but with precision. This is cellular respiration, the quiet undoing of photosynthesis, and you are its witness. You hover inside a cell, watching as glucose, 6 neat carbons strung together with hydrogens and oxygens, is chopped up and harvested for energy. The carbon is set free again, broken down into carbon dioxide molecules that exit like whispers. That's the breath you exhale. It's not just air leaving your lungs, it's spent fuel, the exhaust from your body's microscopic engines. It's almost ironic, isn't it? The same process that gives you life also marks the return of carbon to the atmosphere. No matter how hard your body works to stay upright, focused, alert, every heartbeat, every blink is quietly creating carbon dioxide as a byproduct. You're a furnace wrapped in skin, constantly oxidizing food to fuel your survival, and every time you breathe out, you're completing a loop that began in a leaf. This back and forth between photosynthesis and respiration is the pulsing rhythm of life on Earth. Plants take in CO2 and turn it into sugar. Animals, and plants themselves, eat the sugar and return the carbon as CO2. It's a planetary inhale and exhale, always ongoing. You might think you're independent, that you operate on your own steam, but you're just the second half of a very old sentence. Life breathes, and you are the breath. Historians still argue whether early physicians or philosophers understood this exchange. Aristotle thought breath cooled the body. Galen believed in something called vital spirits moving through the air. It wasn't until the 18th century that scientists like Lavoisier started to piece it all together. Respiration was combustion, just slower and wetter. You're basically a candle with legs. Speaking of candles, here's a quirky experiment for you. In 1770, chemist Joseph Priestley placed a lit candle under a glass jar and watched it go out. He then added a sprig of mint, waited a few days, and found that the candle would burn again. Voila! The mint had restored the air. He didn't yet understand carbon dioxide or oxygen in the way we do now, but he'd caught a glimpse of the great loop in action, plants fixing what animals unfix. You return now to the bloodstream, where carbon dioxide rides in disguise, not as a gas bubble, but dissolved in plasma, some of it transformed into bicarbonate ions. The blood is efficient like that. CO2 doesn't just drift, it hitches rides, changes forms, obeys the chemistry of pH and concentration gradients. When it reaches the lungs, the whole process reverses. Bicarbonate becomes gas again, and just like that, you exhale. The same thing is happening all over the animal kingdom. You're not alone in this respiration relay. Dogs, whales, beetles, pigeons, frogs, even mushrooms, they all respire. Even deep-sea creatures, living in pitch black where no photosynthesis can touch them, still depend on carbon compounds that originated in the surface world. Down there, bacteria chew on carbon that drifted down from above, like snow made of former life. You wander now through a compost pile, rich, warm and faintly steamy. Bacteria and fungi are hard at work digesting dead leaves, apple cores, and that mystery gloop in the bottom of the fridge. As they break it all down, they respire too, releasing more carbon dioxide into the air. Decay, it turns out, is just respiration with better marketing. It's the final chapter of carbon's latest story before it becomes airborne again. And yet the cycle is balanced. For every carbon molecule released through respiration, another will be pulled in by a photosynthesizing leaf. That is, unless something shifts, unless too much carbon is released too fast and not enough is pulled back. We'll get to that, but not yet. For now, you're still in the elegance of the natural cycle. One of the most remarkable things about respiration is how democratic it is. It happens in single-celled organisms and in blue whales. It's ancient, universal, and mostly invisible. It doesn't demand attention, it just keeps going. Every night, as you fall asleep, your breathing slows, your muscles relax, and still your cells work. Still carbon is exchanged. Still the story continues. Scientists have even found evidence that some of the first life forms use similar process. Anaerobic respiration, where carbon compounds are broken down without oxygen. These early microbes may have lived in mudflats or underwater caves, powered by chemistry alone. Some of their descendants are still out there, hissing out methane in oxygen-free bogs, reminding us that the carbon cycle doesn't always need fresh air. Which brings us to a sleepy little paradox. The more energy a creature needs, the more carbon it releases. A hummingbird with its frantic wings respires at astonishing rates. A sloth, hanging upside down in slow-motion dignity, releases far less. You, somewhere in between, not quite frantic, not quite sloth-like, unless it's Monday. So where does that leave you? Just a warm carbon pump in a world of breathers. Every meal you eat becomes carbon fuel. Every run you take burns a little more. Even dreaming uses energy. Tiny carbon costs for imaginary journeys. You're alive because you're breaking down carbon, one atom at a time. And that's not a burden, it's participation. You're part of Earth's longest running tradition. You take a breath now, slow and easy. The air feels cool. You're not just breathing for yourself, you're completing a ritual as old as life. That carbon came from a leaf and now it's going back. You're not losing it, you're returning it. You're sinking now, not in fear or darkness, but in temperature. Cooler, deeper, quieter. Down, down past the splash and sparkle of surface water into the ocean's long twilight. The light fades, the pressure grows, and carbon surrounds you in forms you can't see. It's dissolved in water, clinging to tiny particles, slipping between currents like a whisper. Welcome to the ocean, Earth's vast, underestimated carbon hoarder. At first glance, you might think the air holds most of the planet's carbon. After all, we talk about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere all the time, but the truth is the oceans hold over 50 times more carbon than the air above them. 50 times. The ocean is not just a blue backdrop to your summer vacation. It's the grand vault, the subtle keeper of the carbon ledger. It stores more than it spends, and it doesn't brag. You pass through the upper layer, where sunlight still reaches. Here, in the euphoric upper 100 meters or so, you'll find phytoplankton, the ocean's version of grass, except they're microscopic and far sassier. These tiny organisms perform photosynthesis too, just like land plants, pulling carbon dioxide from the water and turning it into organic matter. When they bloom, it's like a living snowfall, a floating banquet. They feed zooplankton, which feed fish, which feed, well, eventually, someone's sushi craving. Historians still argue whether ancient seafarers noticed the subtle signs of phytoplankton blooms. Some ship logs mention mysterious greenish glows in the water at night, likely caused by bioluminescent plankton. Others mistook dense blooms for strange weather or omens. Whatever the case, nobody realized these tiny creatures were altering the global carbon balance with every invisible breath. You hover now near a dying phytoplankton cell. When its brief life ends, it begins its descent into the deep. It doesn't fall alone. Dead plankton, fish poop, fragments of shells and slime all drift downward in what scientists lovingly call marine snow. It's slow, relentless, and slightly gross, like a wet blizzard made of yesterday's buffet. And with it goes carbon. This sinking material is part of the ocean's biological pump, a critical part of the global carbon cycle. As this snow falls into deeper layers, it carries carbon away from the atmosphere, storing it in the cold dark for hundreds, even thousands of years. Some of it will be eaten along the way, recycled by deep-sea organisms. But a fraction keeps sinking, falling beyond reach, until it's locked into seafloor sediments, carbon in exile. Of course, not all carbon in the ocean sinks. Much of it is dissolved, dancing between different chemical forms. Carbon dioxide reacts with seawater to form carbonic acid, which can then lose hydrogen ions and become bicarbonate or carbonate ions. These transformations are subtle but crucial. They influence everything from coral reef health to ocean pH, to how well the ocean continues to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. Here's a quirky twist. Some sea creatures use those carbonate ions to build their shells. Clams, corals, and tiny planktonic foraminifera all construct armour from calcium carbonate. When they die, those shells drift down, adding to marine snow or settling into chalky layers that may one day become limestone. That peaceful white cliff on the British coast? It's built from ancient plankton skeletons, piled up over eons, a carbon graveyard wearing a sun hat. But the ocean isn't a passive sink, it has moods. In colder regions, surface waters absorb more carbon because CO2 dissolves more easily in cold water. These areas act like thirsty sponges, but in warmer zones, the ocean breathes out carbon, releasing it back into the atmosphere. It's a constant negotiation, a global watery inhale and exhale, and the ocean has help. The solubility pump drives carbon dioxide from the surface into deeper water by the sheer physics of temperature and pressure. Meanwhile, currents like the Great Conveyor Belt, formerly called thermohaline circulation, drag cold, carbon-rich water into the deep and bring warmer, nutrient-loaded water back up in other parts of the world. The entire ocean is in motion, a planetary bloodstream transporting carbon in silence. You drift now into a deep abyssal plain, a flat black seafloor where few things move. Down here, the carbon that made the journey is buried. It may stay here for centuries, or millions of years. Some of it will eventually be locked into rock, some might be subducted by tectonic forces, destined to be reborn as volcanic gas. But for now, it rests. You feel the stillness of it, carbon finally off duty. Scientists still don't fully understand every nuance of oceanic carbon transport. Some studies suggest climate change could slow down the biological and solubility pumps. Warmer waters hold less carbon and stratify more easily, preventing the mixing that brings nutrients to phytoplankton. Others argue the ocean might compensate in surprising ways, using microbial communities we haven't even discovered yet. The ocean is still keeping secrets. And here's something quietly weird. In some parts of the deep sea, carbon from sunken wood or whale carcasses creates entire ecosystems. Creatures gather around these sudden feasts: crabs, worms, strange fish, and bacteria that feast on carbon like it's a 5-star buffet. Some of these bacteria don't even need oxygen. They respire sulfur and methane, carving out niches in places where sunlight has never touched. Life always finds a way to metabolize carbon, even when it seems impossible. As you float upward again, breaking through layers of cold and shadow, you realize that carbon in the ocean isn't just drifting, it's working. It's holding back the full force of atmospheric carbon dioxide, buffering the air we breathe, softening the blow. The ocean has always been our silent partner, handling more than its fair share, but it can only do so much. There's a limit to how much carbon it can absorb without changing. Acidification is one sign, a quiet corrosion of coral reefs and shellfish hatcheries. Warmer oceans hold less gas. Circulation patterns may slow. Carbon, like any guest, can overstay its welcome, and the ocean, for all its depth, can only carry the balance for so long. You break the surface again, gasping not for breath, but in awe. The ocean didn't just cool your skin, it reminded you. Earth's balance depends on unseen things, not just whales or waves, but molecules, invisible exchanges, carbon drifting in quiet spirals, and somewhere, far below, a single carbon atom you once exhaled might still be sinking. You stand now on solid ground, your feet pressing into soil, but beneath the illusion of stillness, carbon is still in motion. It never stops, it merely changes pace. Now, you drift downward, not through ocean water this time, but through rock. Ancient, heavy, patient rock. You pass between sediment layers laid down like pages in a stone book, till you find carbon not swirling or floating or feeding something, but sleeping. This is the slowest path of all, geologic carbon. You're deep within the crust now, among minerals that haven't moved in millennia. Some of them are carbonates, rocks formed when carbon mixed with calcium and magnesium and settled out of the oceans millions of years ago. These rocks hold stories of long-dead marine creatures, compacted into chalk, limestone and dolomite. If you've ever stood atop a scenic cliff and felt poetic, odds are you are standing on the fossilized remains of carbon-rich shells from an ancient sea. This is carbon at its most grounded, literally. Locked away in rocks, it's mostly inert, not part of photosynthesis, not feeding microbes. It can sit here for hundreds of millions of years, caught in a geologic timeout. But don't be fooled by the silence. It's not gone, it's just waiting. Sometimes that carbon gets stirred. Plate tectonics drag oceanic crust, and it's locked up carbon down into the mantle through a process called subduction. There, under unimaginable heat and pressure, the carbon might be transformed into graphite, into diamond, or into carbon dioxide gas. And if it finds a crack to follow, it escapes. Through volcanic vents, hot springs, or explosive eruptions, that ancient carbon gets a second chance at freedom. Historians still argue whether early civilizations understood volcanoes as more than fire and fear. Many saw them as the breath of gods or the mouths of the underworld, and maybe they weren't wrong. Volcanic eruptions release carbon dioxide that's been buried for eons, carbon from dead plankton, coral skeletons, and ancient ocean floors. The Earth quite literally exhales. You float near the rim of a volcano now, feeling the heat rise through stone. Gas hisses upward in invisible streams. Some of this carbon dioxide will mingle with the atmosphere. Some might dissolve into rain and fall again onto rock, starting a new cycle. Rainwater absorbs CO2, becomes slightly acidic, and weathers silicate rocks on the surface. This weathering process pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and sends it back to rivers and oceans, where it can form new carbonates all over again. It's a planetary feedback loop that works on a scale you can't see, one of the great regulators of Earth's temperature. More carbon in the air, warmer climate, more rain, more rock weathering, and that weathering draws down carbon, slowly cooling the planet. It's not perfect, but it's elegant, if you're willing to wait a few million years. Unfortunately, we tend to be in more of a rush. Here's a quirky bit of trivia. Some of the oldest carbon on Earth is in the form of graphite found in 3.8 billion-year-old rocks in Greenland. Scientists believe these ancient carbon inclusions may be biological in origin, remnants of early microbial life. In other words, the carbon traces of life from before there were animals, plants, or possibly even continents. And there's something strangely comforting about that. Even when the planet was young and hostile, carbon was already part of the story. It didn't need a fancy ecosystem, just a chemical reaction, a little warmth and time, always time. Not all geological carbon is so serene, though. Sometimes it gets caught up in drama. When tectonic plates crash together, mountains rise, bringing carbonates from the seafloor up to the sky. The Himalayas, for example, are full of marine fossils, proof that what was once a shallow ocean is now perched miles above sea level. You could be hiking next to the remains of trilobites and not even know it. Just imagine their confusion. And then there's metamorphism, the transformation of rocks under pressure and heat without melting them. This can release carbon dioxide back into the system, slowly or suddenly. That carbon might eventually emerge in a bubbling hot spring, or seep out of cracks in a tectonic fault line. It's a reminder that even the Earth's crust is not quite still. It breathes too, just very, very slowly. Scientists still debate the total amount of carbon stored in Earth's mantle. Some models suggest there's more carbon down there than in all the surface systems combined. Oceans, atmosphere, biosphere. But we can't go down and check. Drilling only reaches so far. The rest is inferred, pieced together from the chemistry of lava and the isotopes found in volcanic gases. The deep carbon cycle is one of science's quieter frontiers, like trying to understand someone's life story by listening through a wall. Back at the surface, carbon continues its journey in another stony disguise. Fossil fuels. Coal, oil and natural gas aren't just ancient energy. They're carbon from long-dead organisms, pressurized and cooked underground. You'll meet those again soon, but remember, every barrel of oil started as life. Every puff of coal smoke came from a fern or a diatom or a swampy tree trunk. You pull away now from the rock layers, drifting upward through fault lines and gravel and bedrock. You leave behind diamonds, marbles, chalk and shale. You've seen carbon as a prisoner and as a traveller, as stardust and as mountain. You've watched it rise in fear and sink into stone, and through it all you begin to understand the carbon cycle isn't just about air and plants, it's about Earth itself, the living and the not quite living, the systems that never stop moving. So next time you hold a pebble or sit on a limestone bench or gaze at a cliff worn down by wind, just know that you're touching something that once drifted in the sky. Carbon condensed, solid, but never still. Now you lie still, not in a bed or a field, but within a block of ancient ice, clear, cold, and older than the concept of time as you understand it. You're drifting inside a glacier, thousands of feet thick, and beneath your motionless form, carbon waits in suspended. Breath. You're not frozen in fear, you're frozen in memory. This is carbon in the cryosphere, trapped in bubbles of air that haven't moved in hundreds of thousands of years. You float within one of these tiny air pockets, sealed into the layered ice like a secret. This isn't just oxygen and nitrogen, it's carbon dioxide, atmospheric carbon, frozen mid-sentence. Scientists drill deep cores into these glaciers and ice sheets to read these trapped whispers, and what they find is astonishing. A record of Earth's breath, going back over 800,000 years. Each layer tells a story of warmth or cold, fire or forest, drought or abundance. The bubbles are bookmarks in a climate diary written by snow. Historians still argue whether ancient peoples sensed long-term climate cycles, but oral traditions in some Arctic and subarctic cultures do include stories of the ice returning or sea animals retreating from warm years, echoes perhaps of deeper environmental memory. What's clear now is that modern science reads these frozen records like scripture. In the high ice of Antarctica and Greenland, core samples have revealed periods of intense volcanic activity. Comet strikes, even the Black Deaths ripple through the biosphere. And of course, carbon levels, always carbon. As you press against the icy wall of a glacier, you feel the pressure of time. Snowfall after snowfall compressing over centuries into dense ice, each layer thinner than the last. And embedded in each is atmospheric carbon dioxide, locked in before the age of electricity, before the age of agriculture, before even the invention of pottery. When you breathe near this ancient air, it's like whispering into the past. Glaciers don't produce carbon, but they're deeply tied to its story. During ice ages, as temperatures drop, carbon dioxide levels fall. Some of it is absorbed into colder oceans, some is stored in permafrost and frozen soils, some is simply a consequence of slowed biological activity. Whatever the cause, the planet breathes in during cold periods. The reverse is true too. When the ice retreats, carbon levels rise again, and the world exhales. You're drifting now toward a place that's more fragile than it appears. Permafrost, frozen soil that underlies much of the Arctic, is another hidden carbon vault. It's not just frozen dirt, It's frozen life, trapped plant matter, ancient roots, mosses, and even the occasional mammoth toe. These are reservoirs of organic carbon that haven't decomposed because microbes went into stasis when the temperatures dropped. They're not dead, they're just waiting. And that's the catch. As the climate warms, permafrost thaws, microbes wake up hungry. They start to break down all that ancient matter, and as they do, they respire, releasing carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. Methane is especially potent, over 25 times more powerful than CO2 in terms of trapping heat. This isn't theoretical, it's happening. In parts of Siberia and Alaska, the ground is collapsing into thawing voids, releasing ancient carbon in sudden alarming gusts. Here's your quirky tidbit for this leg of the journey. Some Siberian researchers recently found a 24,000-year-old microscopic organism, a rotifera, frozen in permafrost, and successfully revived it. Not only did it start moving again, it reproduced. Carbon, it seems, isn't the only thing that waits in the cold. You move carefully now across a glacial surface. Past meltwater streams and hidden crevasses, the ice seems solid, eternal, but it's retreating. Across Greenland, glaciers are melting faster than ever recorded. That melt doesn't just raise sea levels, it also dilutes ocean salinity, disrupting circulation patterns like the Atlantic Meridional overturning current. And as these massive rivers of ice shrink, they stop reflecting sunlight as effectively. More dark rock absorbs more heat. More heat means more melt. More melt means more carbon released. It's a quiet, slippery feedback loop, the kind you barely notice until it's past the point of reversal. And yet this icy realm still has moments of profound calm. You drift over an ancient ice cap under the aurora, and you realize, even in its retreat, the cryosphere holds grace. The carbon inside it is not angry. It is simply persistent. These carbon molecules weren't meant to stay here forever. They're just passing through like everything else. Scientists still debate just how much carbon the permafrost holds. Estimates vary from 1,400 to over 1,300 billion tons, more than twice the amount currently in the atmosphere. It's an enormous uncertainty, and one that makes climate modelling all the more complicated. Will all that carbon be released quickly? Will some stay locked in the soil? No one knows, but the thaw is no longer a possibility. It's a process already in motion. As you rise above the ice, you begin to see Earth's carbon from a different perspective. You see the forests breathing, the oceans pulsing, the rocks rumbling quietly below. And then you see the ice, bright, thin-skinned and vanishing. You feel a pang not just of sadness but of responsibility. The carbon being released from the ice is ancient, innocent. It didn't ask to be part of a feedback loop. And yet here we are. You breathe and you are part of the cycle. The carbon from your exhale may one day drift into a snowstorm, freeze into a glacier, and rest for centuries until some future being finds it and wonders who you were. It's a strange kind of immortality. Now you stretch upward, through roots and rain, emerging gently into a canopy of green. You're standing in a forest, not a particular forest, not one with a name on a map, but the idea of forest, vast and breathing, with trunks that have seen more seasons than civilizations. The air here is thick with silence, birdsong and carbon in motion. These trees, stoic and slow-growing, are among the most powerful players in the carbon cycle. They don't just live, they hoard, they trade, they lock carbon away like botanical bankers with patience far beyond your own. You press your hand against bark. It's cool, textured, slightly damp. Beneath it, cells are quietly transporting sugars and water, building cellulose from the inside out. Each ring of wood tells a carbon story, CO2 from the air, sucked in through leaves, transformed through photosynthesis, and now held in place for decades, sometimes centuries. This is not passive storage, it's an act of will. Trees inhale carbon dioxide and convert it into the very material of their bodies. Every branch, every root, every fallen log started as a gas molecule floating through the sky. You look up and realize, this forest is eating the sky. Historians still argue whether ancient cultures understood this quiet consumption. Many indigenous traditions across the Americas, Africa, and Asia treated forests as sacred, not just spiritually, but ecologically. The trees were protectors, holders of balance. In some myths, humans were sculpted from wood, or trees were thought to house spirits precisely because of their stillness, their age, their role in holding something deeper than anyone could see, and they were right in a way. Forests do hold spirits of carbon. These ecosystems sequester massive amounts of it, not just in trunks and leaves, but in soil, in roots, in the undergrowth and fungi and mulch. The Amazon alone holds around 100 billion metric tons of carbon. Temperate forests like those in Canada and Russia pull even more when you count the soil, and tropical rainforests, they are the planet's lungs, drawing in more carbon than nearly anything else on land, at least for now. You move through the underbrush now, your feet sinking slightly into rich, dark earth. Every footstep stirs carbon, slowly decomposing leaves, beetles churning through last autumn's remains, mycelium threads processing the dead into something reusable. Carbon doesn't just go up into trees, it goes down into soil. And trees are master architects of that process. Here's a fun little fact. Forests talk to each other through underground fungal networks, so-called mycorrhizal systems. These fungi help trees absorb nutrients and water, and in return they get sugars from the trees, but more than that, they allow trees to pass signals and carbon to each other. A mother tree can send carbon to her saplings. An injured tree might signal distress through the network. It's not just a metaphor, it's real. The forest is a web, and carbon is part of its language. You pause beside a fallen log, mossy and hollow. It may look dead, but it's teeming with carbon transactions. Fungi and microbes are breaking it down slowly, returning that stored carbon to the cycle. Some of it will be released into the air as carbon dioxide. Some will stay in the soil, helping new plants grow. Nothing here is wasted. Even in decay, the carbon moves with purpose. Not all forests are equally effective at this game. Old-growth forests tend to store more carbon than young ones, simply because they've had more time. But younger forests can sequester carbon more quickly given the right conditions. That's why reforestation projects are all the rage now. Plant trees, people say, and we can fix the climate. It's a nice thought, but the reality is slower and messier. Trees need time, they can't sequester a century's worth of carbon overnight, and forests are complex, dynamic systems. You can't just plant monoculture rows of fast-growing pine and expect the same results as an ancient grove humming with biodiversity. Scientists are still debating just how much carbon forests can absorb in the long run. There's a limit. As forests mature, they absorb less carbon each year, and climate change is making things harder, more droughts, more pests, more fires. In recent years, parts of the Amazon have even started emitting more carbon than they absorb, tipping from sink to source. You climb now into the canopy where sunlight filters through a cathedral of leaves. Up here, the leaves do the heavy lifting. Each one is a solar panel, pulling CO2 from the air and turning it into sugars with eerie precision. The stomata open, gas flows in, and carbon joins the plant. Some will feed growth, some will become seed or flower, and some will be stored in bark so dense you'd need a chisel to remove it. Trees are slow, yes, but they are deliberate. And here's your quirky tidbit. In 2019, scientists discovered that some trees produce a faint electrical signal when they're stressed. Drought, injury, fire. It's not a scream in the human sense, but it's something. A voltage spike, a whisper in the circuitry of life. Maybe carbon isn't the only thing being exchanged in these quiet cathedrals. You descend again to the forest floor. All around you, carbon is being inhaled, transformed, hoarded, and eventually returned. A leaf falls, a beetle bites, a mushroom blooms, and the carbon shifts form. It doesn't vanish, it just keeps moving. Every tree is a column of captured breath. Every breeze through the branches is a preview of what's to come. You step out of the forest, blinking into the open air. Behind you, the trees go on breathing. The forest doesn't notice your absence. It just keeps going, carbon in, carbon out. You're not separate from it. The carbon in your body may one day feed a tree, and that tree may feed another person, or stand in the forest long after you're gone. You won't last forever, but your carbon might. Now you tumble gently from the trees, not as a leaf, but as something smaller, a molecule of carbon wrapped inside a seed, or a bit of sugar from a plump berry, or a scrap of fur from a passing fox. You've joined the living carousel now, where carbon dances not in air or stone, but in flesh. You're moving through the food web, the intricate choreography of animals, fungi, microbes, and all the carbon trade routes that lie between them. You're no longer drifting aimlessly, you're being eaten. Don't panic, it's perfectly natural. You ride along in the muscles of a caterpillar chewing a leaf, then in the bird that gulps the caterpillar, then in the fox that snatches the bird. At every step, carbon is passed up the chain like a very inefficient game of telephone. Only a tiny fraction moves on. The rest is lost as heat or exhaled as carbon dioxide, or left behind in waste. Life, as it turns out, is a leaky process. You're inside an animal now, let's say a deer. Quiet, soft-eyed, crunching winter bark and stray mushrooms. Carbon from its food is broken down in its cells, used to power muscle and nerve, to build tissue to repair antler. When the deer breathes out, it releases carbon dioxide. Hey, when it grazes, it takes in more. When it dies, things get interesting, because that's when the fungi arrive. You descend into the rich mess of decomposition. It's not pretty, but it's profoundly important. Fungi and bacteria crawl in and begin their feast. They don't do it out of malice, they're just hungry. In breaking down the deer's body, they unlock the carbon stored in its cells and release it back into the soil and the air. Some of it is transformed into humus, rich and dark. Some is turned into spores. Some goes back to the atmosphere with a soft exhale of heat. Historians still argue whether early societies understood the role of decomposition in fertility. Many ancient agricultural cultures, from the Nile to the Andes, practiced composting and seasonal fallowing, but without knowing the molecular exchanges at play. Still, they recognized that decay fed growth, and that where something rotted, something new could thrive. It's only recently that we've begun to appreciate the microscopic middlemen of the carbon cycle, the bacteria and fungi doing the invisible labour. And oh, what labour it is. In the soil beneath your feet, trillions of microbes are constantly processing carbon. Every dead leaf, every worm dropping, every bit of rotting wood is part of their buffet. Fungi, in particular, play an outsized role. Some break down lignin, the tough fibrous stuff in wood that most other organisms can't touch. Without fungi, forests would be clogged with undecomposed logs, carbon trapped in stasis. Instead, they free it. They're the unsung heroes of the decay economy. Here's your quirky science morsel for the evening. There's a species of fungus in Oregon's Blue Mountains that may be the largest living organism on Earth. It stretches underground across over 2 miles, connected by a vast network of mycelium. And yes, it's digesting carbon the entire time. Think of it as an ancient silent accountant, slowly redistributing the carbon wealth of the forest one molecule at a time. Back in the animal kingdom, carbon moves with every bite, every breath, every excretion. You follow it into a dung beetle merrily rolling a ball of waste across the savannah. That carbon may have once been part of a zebra's breakfast grass. Now it's being buried underground. Later it may become food for microbes or fertilizer for a new sprout. Carbon has no pride. It will ride in blood, in feces, in fungus, in flour. And then there's the scavengers. Vultures, hyenas, crabs. Every ecosystem has its cleanup crew. They speed up the breakdown, making sure that carbon doesn't stagnate. In the ocean, it's no different. You have detritivores and filter feeders consuming the leftovers of marine snow. On coral reefs, fish nibble at coral mucus, poop out nutrients, and keep the whole system spinning. The cycle doesn't stop at death. It flourishes there. You float now through a wetland, one of nature's great carbon hotspots. Marshes, peat bogs, and swamps are surprisingly efficient at storing carbon. Organic material builds up faster than it breaks down, especially in waterlogged, low-oxygen conditions. Over centuries, these environments become carbon sinks, trapping more than they release. But they're frail. Drain them, and the carbon gets released in a rush. Scientists still debate how much carbon wetlands can hold long-term. Restoration projects are underway around the globe, and early signs are promising. But these systems are delicate, reliant on specific water balances, plant types, and microbial communities. Get it wrong, and a potential sink becomes a source. You pass now into the belly of a cow. Don't ask how, it's just part of the journey. Inside, microbes in the rumen are breaking down tough plant cellulose, and in the process, releasing methane, a potent greenhouse gas. Ruminants like cows and sheep are natural methane factories, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because their digestive systems rely on a lot of microbial fermentation, carbon in, methane out. And that brings us to one of the cycle's odder truths: not all carbon returns as CO2. Some become CH4, some as organic acids, some as part of long-lived molecules that drift in rivers, float in the air, or hide in bone. The forms shift, but the carbon keeps mooing. You rise now above the fields, forests and wetlands, seeing the whole network spread out like lace across the planet. Carbon is not locked into a neat circle. It loops, tangles, forks. A deer's breath might become a mushroom's food. A bird's feather might become soil. Your own breath might one day ride in a fern or a fox or a fungus. You're part of this food web too. Every bite you take is carbon borrowed. Every breath returns it. There's no opt-out button. No way to be outside the system. You're made from it, sustained by it, and one day you'll return to it. But until then, you keep moving. Hand to mouth, breath to breeze, passing carbon along like the world's most ancient relay. Now your feet settle gently into the earth, soft, loamy, warm. Not the kind of dirt you brush off your jeans, but the kind you could sleep in. Black with life, humming quietly beneath your toes. This is soil, not just a stage where plants and animals play, but an entire underworld of carbon traffic. You're entering the carbon bank beneath our feet, the secret vault where the planet stashes its savings for later. Welcome to the underground economy. Soil holds more carbon than all the world's vegetation and the atmosphere combined. Let that sink in, literally. Every fallen leaf, every dead root, every strand of decomposed squirrel is part of the deposit. And unlike above-ground ecosystems, soil doesn't just store carbon passively, it negotiates with it. You're standing in the midst of millions of microdeals, bacteria metabolizing sugars, fungi weaving nutrient webs, earthworms digesting yesterday's compost into something new. You move deeper, feeling the layers change. The topsoil is rich with organic matter, decaying plant bits, insect frass, fungal threads. Further down, the carbon becomes older, more complex, bound tightly to mineral particles. This is stable carbon, sometimes locked away for centuries. It resists breakdown like a stubborn secret, but given the right trigger, say a sudden plough or a shift in moisture, it can be released in an instant. Historians still argue whether early farmers understood the full power of soil carbon. In Amazonia, ancient peoples created terra preta, or dark earth, a type of super fertile soil enriched with charcoal, bone and organic waste. Thousands of years later, it's still rich with carbon and nutrients. Was it a happy accident or intentional bioengineering? No one agrees, but what's clear is that soil, when managed wisely, becomes a time capsule for carbon. When abused, it becomes a leak. And abuse is easy. Conventional agriculture churns up spoil, exposing carbon to oxygen and speeding its breakdown into CO2. Every till, every bare patch between plantings is a tiny carbon hemorrhage. Monocultures strip the land of cover and diversity, starving soil life. Without roots to hold it or mulch to feed it, carbon evaporates into the atmosphere like spilled perfume. But when the soil is healthy, covered, diverse, rich with roots and detritus, it sequesters carbon with grace. It absorbs what the plants give and tucks it away. This is known as soil organic carbon, and it's the most dynamic part of the underground system. It's not just about how much carbon is stored, but how fast it moves and who's using it. You pause now in a tiny cavern beside a root tip. It's leaking sugars into the soil, feeding a riot of microbes in exchange for minerals and water. This process, called rhizodeposition, is one of the most underappreciated carbon pathways. Plants deliberately give away up to 40% of their photosynthesized carbon through their roots, not because they're feeling grandiose, but just because it buys them access to resources. It's like paying rent to the fungi and bacteria who run the neighborhood. Here's a quirky fact. Some bacteria near roots use carbon to build biofilms, sticky protective layers that help them colonize soil particles. These microbial mats might seem insignificant, but collectively they shape how carbon moves, sticks, and stays underground. They are like carbon's passport office, determining which molecules get to travel and which stay put. You drift past the tunnels of earthworms, nature's original tillers. Their movement mixes carbon-rich surface material with deeper layers, creating space for air and water while also helping stabilize organic matter. Worms don't just wriggle, they engineer. They help transform raw decay into stable humus, the long-term storage form of soil carbon. Think of it as carbon's retirement plan, but the system isn't invincible. Droughts slow microbial activity, floods drown the oxygen they need. Acidification, pollution, overgrazing, and even too much fertilizer can all disturb the delicate carbon rhythm of the soil. Once lost, soil carbon is hard to replace. Rebuilding it takes decades of cover crops, compost, reduced tillage, and patience. Scientists still debate how much carbon soil can realistically sequester. Some claim vast potential, arguing that improved farming and grazing practices could offset a significant portion of human emissions. Others warn of limits, saturation points, trade-offs, and diminishing returns. Soil isn't a black hole. It can only take in what its biology and structure allow. Still, there's hope in the dirt. Around the world, farmers, researchers, and indigenous communities are exploring regenerative practices that work with nature rather than against it. Rotational grazing, agroforestry, biochar application, all are designed to keep carbon in the ground longer. These aren't just carbon solutions, they're strategies for healing entire ecosystems. And soil doesn't just store carbon, it releases it with personality. When disturbed, it exhales not just CO2, but laughter-inducing amounts of laughing gas, nitrous oxide, a potent greenhouse gas. Microbial process like nitrification and denitrification produce it under certain conditions. A little too much nitrogen fertilizer, a little too little oxygen. Boom, out it comes, the soil's revenge. You lie back on the surface now, knowing the ground beneath you is anything but inert. You're not just standing on soil, you're standing on memory. On millennia of fallen leaves, buried roots, and decomposed dreams. Carbon has been building here for eons, quietly shaping the planet's climate of fertility and future. And maybe one day a piece of you will join it. Not in a grim way, but in the most natural sense imaginable. You eat, you live, you walk, you fall. Eventually you return, and the soil will know what to do with you. It always has. You smell smoke now. It clings to your clothes, your eyelashes, even the hairs on your arms. You're standing at the edge of a forest on fire, watching orange light flicker through blackened trunks. The air is hot, heavy with ash, and somewhere above, your carbon molecule begins its escape. This is combustion, the fast lane of the carbon cycle. No time for slow decomposition or cozy soil beds. Here, carbon doesn't wait to be recycled. It bursts free in a blaze, and suddenly everything changes. Fire is ancient, as old as life on land. As soon as plants covered the earth, fires followed. Bold. Triggered by lightning, volcanoes, and later, by humans with flint and curiosity. You step through charred underbrush now, watching embers wink like stars underfoot. That tree, just yesterday a quiet column of stored carbon, now releases it all in a few frantic minutes. Every ring, every leaf, every locked away sugar turn to carbon dioxide, methane, soot. And it doesn't stop with trees. Fires sweep across grasslands, peat bogs, croplands, even tundra. Some fires burn low and slow, licking across the forest floor. Others explode into the canopy, consuming whole ecosystems in hours. All of them release carbon fast and loud. Where it took decades to store, it takes minutes to lose. Historians still argue whether fire was the first technology humans mastered. Evidence of controlled burning goes back nearly 1 million years. Early humans likely used it to clear land, hunt animals, and protect themselves from predators. But with fire came consequence. Every blaze shifted the local carbon balance, turning biomass into gas, ash, and change. Some carbon stayed behind in charcoal, a more stable form that resists decay, but much of it soared into the sky, fueling the atmosphere with invisible baggage. You crouch beside a pile of ash. It's still warm. Beneath the grey dust is charcoal, black, brittle, and oddly beautiful. Charcoal is carbon in one of its purest forms, and unlike other combustion byproducts, it resists breakdown. It can persist in soil for hundreds, even thousands of years, acting as a kind of carbon vault. In some cases, fire doesn't just release carbon, it leaves behind a more stable version of it. Here's a quirky historical twist. In Japan's Edo period, farmers would bury charcoal in their fields to improve fertility. It helped retain water, provided habitat for microbes, and locked carbon in the soil. Today, that practice has been revived as biochar, a modern carbon sequestration tool gaining traction in regenerative agriculture. Burn biomass in low oxygen, bury the charcoal, and you've got a carbon sink with a smoky past. Still, fire is a double-edged sword. It clears land, recycles nutrients, and stimulates regrowth, but it also emits gigatons of carbon each year, and thanks to climate change, wildfires are becoming more frequent, intense, and unpredictable. Drier conditions and higher temperatures extend fire seasons and turn small sparks into regional disasters. You rise now and walk through a burned forest. At first it looks lifeless, but then you notice the green shoots pushing up through the ash, fireweed, ferns, sprouting trees. In some ecosystems, like boreal forests or chaparral, fire is a necessary step. Certain seeds only germinate after fire. Some pines need heat to release their cones. The fire resets the system. Carbon released above is partly reabsorbed below, not perfectly, but cyclically. Scientists still debate whether increased wildfire activity will turn the world's forests from carbon sinks into carbon sources. Some regions, like parts of the Amazon and California, are already tipping. More frequent fires mean less time for regrowth, less time for carbon to be stored. The cycle starts to slip out of balance, and once the tipping point comes, regrowth can't keep up with loss. And then there's the hidden fires, the ones underground. In peatlands, fires can smoulder below the surface for weeks, even months. These fires consume centuries of stored carbon in slow, smoky ruin. The 97 Indonesian peat fires released as much carbon as the entire United States did that year. Peat is supposed to stay wet and cool, dry it out, intentionally or accidentally, and it becomes a carbon bomb waiting for a match. But fire isn't always natural. Humans use fire everywhere, for heat, for cooking, for energy, for clearing fields and burning trash. Combustion is our oldest trick, and we've refined it into everything from campfires to jet engines. Every match, every car engine, every smokestack is part of carbon's fiery escape plan. We've made combustion not just a necessity, but a culture. You drift into a village now, somewhere warm, where cooking fires dot the evening landscape. The smell of burning wood blends with laughter and rice steam. In these fires, the carbon in dry rice husks and branches is released, not as part of destruction, but as daily life. And yet, it adds up. Globally, the small-scale fires of daily human life contribute significantly to emissions. Not as flashy as wildfires, but persistent. And so, fire becomes a storyteller. It's a way to mark transition, from stored carbon to released, from forest to field, from life to ash. But it also leaves behind possibilities: charcoal, renewal, even new soil fertility. Fire is neither hero nor villain. It's just another phase in carbon's endless transformation. As you leave the smoke behind, your eyes sting slightly. The sun is dimmed by haze. You know that some of the carbon rising now will settle into clouds, fall as rain, or be inhaled by a plant miles away. The cycle doesn't stop, not even in flames. You take a breath and taste it, the faint tang of combustion. Somewhere in your lungs is a molecule that was once part of a pine tree, now airborne on its way to a new role. The fire is over. The carbon, as always, continues. You're no longer drifting with a leaf or buried in soil. Now you're strapped to a piston, spinning in rhythm, heat rising in your ears. You've entered the machine, the modern engine of carbon's accelerated escape. This is the industrial shortcut, and it's moving fast. Here, carbon no longer waits for the patient loops of photosynthesis and decay. It's being yanked from its ancient tombs, refined, burned, and flung skyward in record time. The pace is dizzying. The cycle is bent, out of shape. You ride with a carbon atom as it breaks free from a lump of coal. Black, dense, the remains of a forest buried for 300 million years. It once shaded dinosaurs, breathed through fern fronds, settled into a swampy grave and waited. Then someone dug it up, crushed it and burned it to boil water, to spin turbines, to light a billboard that says "sail" in blinking neon letters. The carbon's journey took epochs to prepare. The release took seconds. It's the same story for oil and natural gas. Both formed from marine organisms buried under heat and pressure for unimaginable stretches of time. You're pulled now through a pipeline, your carbon molecule jostled and pressurized, refined into gasoline or jet fuel or plastic precursors. You feel yourself pushed into motion through an engine, up a smokestack, into the atmosphere. This is not the old carbon cycle, this is the express route. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution's inventors understood the implications of this shortcut. Certainly, they recognized coal's power. It fueled steamships, trains, textile machines, and smog-drenched skylines. James Watt, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, They unleashed carbon in service of industry, never imagining the long-term consequences. The steam engine was a marvel. The carbon release was a side effect. But the shortcut wasn't temporary, it became a system. You hover now over a city at night. Power plants glowing orange, traffic weaving below, planes stitching lines across the sky. Every light, every engine, every buzz of energy was likely born from fossil carbon. We are, quite literally, burning the past to power the present. And it's not just energy. That carbon appears in asphalt roads, plastic bottles, synthetic fabrics, fertilizers, detergents, even chewing gum. When you touch almost anything mass-produced, you're handling fossil carbon that's been reshaped. Sometimes it's locked in material form for decades, your yoga mat, your car bumper. Or sometimes it's burned almost instantly, your morning commute, your flight to Cabo. Either way, it's not staying underground. Here's your quirky twist. The carbon in your disposable coffee lid might have started as a phytoplankton in the Jurassic Ocean. It got buried, cooked into crude oil, refined in a petrochemical plant, and moulded into a convenient caffeine accessory. That's a 150 million year journey, ending in 15 minutes in a landfill. Of course, the emissions don't just vanish, you rise now into the atmosphere, joining the thin veil of gases surrounding Earth. Carbon dioxide spreads evenly, staying in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. It doesn't dissipate like smoke, it accumulates. Since the beginning of industrialization, atmospheric CO2 has risen from about 280 parts per million to over 420, a sharp curve in what should be a slow spiral. Scientists call this a perturbation of the carbon cycle, like throwing a wrench into a watch. The loops still run, plants still photosynthesize, animals still respire, but the balance is off. We're releasing fossil carbon much faster than Earth's natural systems can absorb it. Oceans take up some, forests help, but they can't keep pace. The result is warming, feedback loops, uncertainty, and it's not evenly distributed. You drift now across continents, emissions highest in industrial centres, while forests and oceans try to absorb what they can. Developing nations often bear the brunt of climate impacts despite contributing less to the carbon overload. Fossil carbon is not just a scientific issue, it's a political one, a moral one. Still, the temptation is immense. Fossil fuels are energy-dense, cheap and familiar. Burning them has brought comfort, mobility, medicine, technology. The modern world is built on carbon combustion, and now we're scrambling to rethink it. You fly through wind farms and solar arrays, through electric car factories and carbon capture test sites. These are hopeful signs, but still small compared to the scale of the fossil fire. For every step forward, emissions keep rising. The shortcut became a dependency, and breaking it will take more than gadgets. Scientists still debate how much fossil carbon remains underground and how much can safely be burned. Some say we've already passed critical thresholds, others believe innovation, policy and reforestation can tip the balance. The carbon is there, the choice is ours, but the truth is plain. Fossil fuels are not part of the original carbon cycle. They are stored carbon, meant to be buried. By burning them, we've looped in carbon that was supposed to stay quiet. We've opened a vault that can't be easily shut. You land now on a rooftop late at night. A plane hums overhead. A boiler clicks on. Somewhere in the distance, a refinery flares orange against the sky. You inhale, and in that breath is the past. Carbon from forests that fell before humanity existed. Carbon from seas that boiled with trilobites. It's here, now, in your lungs, in your home, in the heat of your radiator. This isn't meant to be guilt, just context. You're part of this system too. You don't control all of it, but you do move through it. The shortcut has consequences, yes, but also opportunities, ways to rethink how we power our lives, how we build, grow, eat and travel. You're not alone in this. The whole world breathes together. The fossil fire still burns, but you don't have to add fuel. Now you float above the planet like a hesitant accountant, ledger in hand, eyes scanning numbers that won't quite line up. You're watching Earth's carbon budget, the great balancing act of inputs and outputs, trying to trace where every molecule goes. On paper, the process looks tidy, emissions in, sequestration out. But in practice, it's murkier than a swamp at midnight. You see emissions rising from factories, engines, fires. You see absorption by oceans and forests. And then, you notice it, the missing carbon. a few gigatons unaccounted for. It's not gone, it's just misplaced. This is what scientists call the missing sink. Every year we emit a known quantity of carbon dioxide. We measure how much ends up in the atmosphere, how much dissolves into oceans, how much gets pulled into plants, and yet a portion, usually around a quarter, seems to vanish. Not lost exactly, just not fully tracked. Some years it's more, some less. It's like a ghost in the system, drifting between roots, microbes and mystery. You follow it into a pine forest. Cool, quiet, deceptively ordinary. A recent study suggests boreal forests may absorb more carbon than we thought, especially in early summer. But the range is wide, the model's uncertain. A heat wave, a beetle outbreak, a late frost, all can shift the numbers. One tree's breath may not match another's, and what was a carbon sink yesterday may turn into a source tomorrow. Historians still argue when the idea of a global carbon budget first entered mainstream science. It was in the 1970s, maybe earlier, that researchers began assembling these planetary ledgers. They were trying to predict climate futures, using the best tools they had: primitive satellites, tree rings, ice cores. The numbers got better over time, but the mystery never fully vanished. Now, you zoom in on a tropical forest. The canopy is thick with green, but the soil below tells a different story. In some regions, deforestation and degradation mean that forests still look healthy from space, even as their carbon dynamics shift underground. Logging, fires, and fragmentation reduce their ability to absorb carbon, and yet they still take in some, just not as much as we wish. You drift through a field in transition, land that was forest, then farm, now abandoned and sprouting shrubs. Is it a carbon sink? A source? That depends on rainfall, species, soil type and time. Land use change is notoriously difficult to track in carbon terms. It can take decades for new vegetation to stabilise the carbon flow, and during that lag, the budget wobbles. Meanwhile, in the oceans, things are equally confusing. Surface waters absorb carbon quickly, but deep ocean mixing is slow. Phytoplankton blooms sequester carbon for weeks, then decay. Some sinks, some is eaten, some dissolves. The ocean's biological pump is efficient but full of uncertainties. Shifts in temperature and acidity alter plankton communities in subtle ways. A single heat wave can disrupt carbon drawdown across an entire gyre. And then there's the role of soil microbes. You lean in close now, observing a tiny drama under the microscope. Bacteria consume a fragment of root, release carbon dioxide, or maybe store it in their biomass. It's unpredictable. Some microbes are more efficient, some go dormant, some die and feed others. Soil carbon modelling is one of the most complex puzzles in climate science. There are thousands of species interacting at nanoscopic scales, and we only know a fraction of what they're doing. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some scientists refer to microbial soil behaviour as the microbial dark matter. Not because it's invisible in space, but because we don't fully understand it. Their chemistry shapes global carbon dynamics, yet they remain frustratingly mysterious. You could have a square metre of soil that acts like a carbon sink next to another that does the opposite, all depending on who's home. You try to do the math. Emissions from fossil fuels, check. Deforestation, check. Ocean uptake, partial. Terrestrial uptake, murky. Soil storage, model dependent. Wildcards like permafrost and wetlands looming. The numbers don't quite close, the budget doesn't balance. And that's the heart of the problem. How do you steer the ship if you're not sure how much fuel is leaking? Scientists still debate how climate change itself is affecting the sinks. Some models predict that warming will weaken natural carbon absorption over time. Others suggest that elevated CO2 might boost plant growth, what's sometimes called the CO2 fertilization effect. But it's not simple. More CO2 doesn't always mean more biomass. Plants need water, nutrients, and stable conditions. And if warming brings drought or stress, that extra carbon might never make it into wood. You float now above a city where researchers launch carbon monitoring balloons. Satellites pass overhead, measuring the planet's breath in spectral bands. We're getting better at tracking these flows. High-resolution data, machine learning models, even AI simulations. Still, the uncertainty remains. Carbon is slippery, it moves in hidden ways. And so you're left with this uneasy truth. The Earth's carbon systems are vast, elegant, and still partly unknowable. The more we study, the more complexity we uncover. It's not a failure. It's a reminder that the planet is alive and that life resists being reduced to a spreadsheet. You settle down now beside a scientist's cluttered desk, papers, climate models, satellite data, and a half-drunk coffee. They're staring at a graph that doesn't quite add up. Somewhere out there, carbon is moving in silence, unmeasured. Maybe in a forest grove no one's studied yet. Maybe in a patch of sea ice slowly melting. Maybe in you. You close the ledger for now, not because the math is wrong, but because the story continues. The budget isn't finished. The cycle isn't closed, and carbon, as always, has more places to be. Now you find yourself tangled in something oddly familiar. A crinkly grocery bag twisting in the wind. It catches on a fence post, flutters like a ghost, then tumbles down into a drainage ditch. You're riding inside a strand of polyethylene, one of the most common plastics on Earth. And yes, this too is carbon, just rearranged, moulded, fossil-derived and forgotten. You've stumbled into one of carbon's strangest detours, the land of synthetics. Welcome to the long pause in the carbon cycle. Plastics are carbon taken out of circulation and trapped for now in objects that refuse to rot. Bottles, bags, straws, toys, toothbrushes, dashboards, microbeads, sneakers, smartphones. This is carbon that was buried for hundreds of millions of years, pumped to the surface as crude oil, refined, polymerized, extruded and shaped. But instead of being burned like fuel, this carbon was locked into form. It doesn't float away, it sits. You drift through a landfill now. The smell is sour, sweet, damp and oddly metallic. Beneath the layers of garbage lies a hidden continent of carbon, mostly in plastic. It's inert for now, but persistent. Plastic doesn't decompose in any meaningful biological sense. It doesn't nourish microbes. It doesn't rejoin the atmosphere. It just breaks into smaller and smaller pieces, like a ghost shrinking into sand. That grocery bag could outlast your civilization. Historians still argue about who truly invented plastic. The first semi-synthetic plastic, Parkasine, emerged in the mid-19th century. Later came Bakelite in the early 1900s, a hard, durable plastic used in telephones and radios. But it wasn't until the explosion of petrochemical industries after World War II that plastics became ubiquitous. What began as a miracle material quickly became a monster of convenience. You float now into a recycling plant, a symphony of clanking belts, robotic arms, and colour-sorting lasers. It's hopeful here. Some of the carbon in plastics is reclaimed, reprocessed, reimagined as new containers or carpet fibres. But recycling rates are still low globally, so less than 10% for many plastic types. The rest ends up incinerated, dumped, or drifting into the sea. And there, in the ocean, the plastic becomes something stranger. Sunlight breaks it down into microplastics, tiny fragments that float in soil, often coated in organic matter. Fish mistake them for food, so do seabirds. And in an ironic twist, some of that plastic carbon ends up back in the food chain. You might already have a few molecules of synthetic carbon in your gut. Your intestines are probably less surprised than you are. Here's a strange little fact for your sleepless thoughts. Some microbes have begun to evolve the ability to digest certain types of plastic. In 2016, scientists in Japan discovered a strain of bacteria that can break down PTT, the plastic in water bottles, into simpler molecules. It's not efficient yet, but it's a sign. Carbon always finds a way home, even from the strangest side quests. You hover now above a toy store, watching shelves of brightly coloured items, carbon moulded into joy. Dolls, action figures, skateboards, Nerf darts. All of it, fossil carbon in disguise. A child may play with it, grow up, forget it, toss it. The carbon will linger. It's not a problem today, maybe not even tomorrow. But in geological terms, it's weird. We've taken carbon that was supposed to stay buried and made it fun-sized and bright pink. Even in clothing, carbon has found new forms. Synthetic fibres like polyester, nylon and spandex are all plastic-based, essentially wearable oil. Every time you wash your yoga pants, microfibres break off and head into the water system. From there, some drift into rivers, some settle in sludge, some reach the ocean. It's fashion, but make it fossilised. Scientists still debate how much synthetic carbon can be considered sequestered. After all, it's not in the atmosphere. But it's not really stable either. As plastics degrade or are incinerated, their carbon can eventually return to the air. And many plastics include additives, dyes and other volatile compounds that complicate their environmental fate. They're a pause button in the cycle, but not a permanent stop. You pass now into a manufacturing facility, Steel beams, acrid heat, vats of resin. Here, raw petroleum is turned into pellets, then into products. The carbon doesn't know it's being repackaged. It just moves. Refined, reacted, reshaped. The scale is breathtaking. Millions of tons of plastic produced every year. And most of it is single use. And then there's e-waste. Laptops, phones, chargers, monitors, all packed with plastic parts, circuit boards, insulation, carbon layered with rare metals and toxic glues. It doesn't burn clean, it doesn't recycle well, and it piles up in scrapyards from Ghana to Guangdong, leaching carbon and chemicals alike. You pause beside a trash can. Inside, a cracked toothbrush, a takeout container, a ballpoint pen. Each item mundane, each one carrying carbon that used to lie under prehistoric seas. We've turned ancient molecules into disposable trivia, and somehow even that matters. But it's not all despair. Some designers and researchers are creating biodegradable plastics from algae, starches, and even fungi. If they scale up, these materials could return carbon to the natural cycle more easily. It's early, but it's as possible. Carbon doesn't mind what form it takes, it just needs to move. It prefers motion to stagnation, even if it has to wear a barcode for a while. So you leave the landfill, the factory, the windblown bag. You rise again into the larger cycle, remembering that even strange detours eventually lead back to the main road. The plastic might persist, yes, but one day it too will break down. It might be chewed by a microbe, burned by accident, recycled into a new shape. One way or another, the carbon will rejoin the dance. It just takes longer when it comes with a brand label. You're drifting now over checkerboard fields, long rows of crops stretching toward the horizon in neat, mechanical symmetry. Tractors churn up dust in the distance. Irrigation pivots draw arcs of silver across the soil, and cows chew methodically behind wooden fences. It all looks orderly, domesticated, nature-managed. But beneath that quiet rhythm, carbon is being exchanged, lost, stored, and sometimes flung recklessly into the sky. You've arrived at agriculture's carbon footprint, where your food and fuel are part of carbon's modern dilemma. You land softly in a wheat field. The stalks sway gently, golden and crisp, each one a vessel of borrowed carbon. These plants pulled CO2 from the air through photosynthesis, just like the trees you floated past earlier. But unlike trees, they don't get to hold on to it for long. When the grain is harvested, processed, eaten or burned, that carbon is released. Some stays in the soil as roots and crop residue, but much is cycled quickly into atmosphere, animal or landfill. Agriculture is a constant loop of take and release. But it's a loop running hot. You hover near a combine harvester now, watching the blades slice through plants grown on fertilizer made from fossil fuels. You trace the carbon trail, from natural gas used to manufacture ammonia, to the synthetic nitrogen spread over fields, to the microbial reactions in the soil that release nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas nearly 300 times more potent than CO2. That's agriculture's secret leak, not just carbon dioxide, but gases far more intense. Historians still argue whether early farmers understood the carbon dynamics of their fields. The ancient Chinese and Mesoamericans used crop rotation, compost and intercropping that preserved soil health and helped retain organic matter. But modern industrial agriculture, it's efficient, yes, but often forgets the soil. Tilling, monoculture and synthetic inputs strip away carbon faster than it can be replaced. You glide now over a rice paddy, shallow and gleaming in the morning light. From above it's peaceful, from below it bubbles. Anaerobic conditions in flooded fields cause organic matter to decompose slowly, producing methane, a major agricultural emission. Rice feeds half the world's population, but it also quietly exhales gigatons of carbon in the form of methane each year. You shift again, this time to a feedlot. Rows of cattle standing in mud chewing cud with the casual boredom of animals born into efficiency. Inside their stomachs, microbial fermenters churn plant matter into energy, and along the way, methane. Ruminants like cows, sheep and goats are walking bioreactors. One cow can burp out up to 250 to 500 litres of methane per day. Multiply that by the world's livestock and you've got a major piece of the atmospheric puzzle. Here's a quirky but sobering fact. Cow burps, not farts despite popular myth, are a bigger problem for methane emissions. Scientists are working on methane-reducing feed additives like seaweed and essential oils, trying to tweak the microbiology of the cow itself. It's a strange kind of innovation, eco-engineering through digestive systems. But animals aren't the only issue. You pass over ploughed fields, bare, dry, crumbling. Tillage disturbs the soil, exposing organic matter to oxygen and causing rapid carbon loss. Each pass of the plough is a breath of carbon dioxide rising into the air. Over decades, this leads to degraded soils with lower fertility, forcing more fertilizer use, which in turn emits more carbon. It's a feedback loop dressed in overalls. Yet not all is bleak. You find yourself now in a regenerative farm. Polyculture crops, no-till methods, cover crops holding the soil in place, rotational grazing that mimics the patterns of wild herbivores. Here, carbon is being drawn back into the ground. Roots feed microbes, mulch keeps the surface cool and moist, livestock fertilize as they move. The result? Healthier soil, more biodiversity, and a slower, steadier carbon cycle. Scientists still debate the full potential of regenerative agriculture. Can it scale globally? Can it meaningfully draw down atmospheric carbon? Some studies say yes, others say it's not enough on its own. What's clear is that practices like composting, cover cropping, and reducing chemical inputs help soil store more carbon over time. And that's a good thing, whether it's a silver bullet or not. You visit a greenhouse now, humid, controlled, efficient. Some vegetables are grown hydroponically with no soil at all. Carbon dioxide is sometimes added artificially to boost plant growth. It's surreal. A closed loop of high-tech farming where carbon is dosed like fertilizer. The plants thrive, but it's not carbon sequestration. It's growth on a leash. Then you follow a cargo ship loaded with soybeans and corn, their embedded carbon now travelling across oceans to feed livestock or fuel cars. Biofuels sound like a carbon-neutral dream. Plants grow, absorb CO2, then are burned and return it. But in practice, land use changes and fertilizer emissions can cancel out the benefits. Plus, forests are sometimes cleared for biofuel crops, trading old carbon sinks for temporary ones. You rise now into the sky above a global food system stretched to its limits. Industrial-scale agriculture feeds billions, but its carbon cost is staggering. Roughly a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions come from food systems, not just farming, but processing, packaging, transport, refrigeration, and waste. So much waste. A third of all food produced is lost or thrown away, and with it, the carbon that went into growing it. You end your journey beside a compost heap. Not glamorous, but beautiful in its own way. Apple cores, coffee grounds, leaves, stems, all breaking down into rich humus. Some. Carbon escapes as CO2, yes, but much is captured in soil as stable organic matter. It's a humble act, this turning of food scraps into soil, but it's a piece of the solution. You take a deep breath. Somewhere nearby, a field is being planted. Somewhere else, a cow is chewing, a tractor is running, a loaf of bread is rising. Agriculture doesn't pause, but maybe, just maybe, it can shift toward balance, toward soil, toward a carbon cycle that feeds without bleeding, because food is carbon, and so are you. You're walking now through a boardroom, not a forest or a field, but a place with polished floors, filtered air, and too many spreadsheets. The hum of artificial lighting replaces the whisper of leaves. Here, carbon wears a tie. It's not stored in soil or swirling in the sea. It's discussed over coffee, calculated in graphs, negotiated in contracts. Welcome to the world of carbon markets, where emissions are given a price, where offsets are traded like stocks, and where balance, at least on paper, is the ultimate currency. You sit in on a meeting. A company is reviewing its carbon footprint. Scope 1, direct emissions. Scope 2, indirect emissions from purchased energy. Scope 3, everything else, supply chain, transportation, even employee commutes. It's a mess of numbers, estimates, and disclaimers. But it all leads to a single question. How can we emit less, and what do we do about what we still emit? The answer, more often than not, is to offset. Carbon offsetting is the act of compensating for emissions by funding projects that absorb or prevent equivalent amounts of CO2 elsewhere. Planting trees, preserving forests, capturing methane from landfills, switching to renewable energy. It's a tempting proposition. Do your business as usual here. Pay someone to cancel it out there. It's a ledger trick, but also a genuine attempt to rebalance. Historians still argue when the first carbon offset truly occurred. Some point to reforestation projects in the early 90s. Others to the Clean Development Mechanism, CDM, established under the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. The idea has grown since then into a multi-billion-dollar market, voluntary and regulated alike, drawing in corporations, nations, and even everyday consumers buying offsets for their flights. But you sense a tension here. Not all offsets are created equal. You wander into a carbon-neutral coffee company's forest project, hundreds of acres supposedly preserved as a carbon sink. But when you check the details, the forest was never really at risk of deforestation. The carbon savings might not be additional, it might not even be permanent. If a wildfire sweeps through, that stored carbon is gone. If the forest is poorly managed, the offset doesn't offset. The numbers fall apart. This is the problem of permanence, additionality and leakage, three carbon market buzzwords that often go ignored. Permanence asks, will the carbon stay stored long enough to matter? Additionality asks, would the reduction or storage have happened anyway? And leakage asks, did protecting one area simply shift deforestation to another? You step into another project now, a renewable energy plant in a developing country partially funded by offset purchases from a tech firm in California. This one is more solid. The emissions prevented are measurable. The power generated replaces fossil fuel energy, but still, the lines blur. Is this truly carbon-neutral behaviour or just mitigation at arm's length? And then there's the rise of carbon credits, each representing 1 metric tonne of CO2 avoided or removed. These credits can be bought, sold, hoarded, retired. Entire portfolios are built around them. Hedge funds invest in them. Crypto startups tokenize them. Carbon, once the invisible thread of life, now lives in blockchain ledgers and trading platforms. Here's a quirky fact for your sleepy mind. Some companies have created carbon-negative diamonds, claiming to pull carbon from the atmosphere and compress it into gem-quality stones. It's part marketing, part chemistry, part spectacle. Your wedding ring could be a wearable carbon offset, romantic and slightly absurd. You walk past booths at a sustainability expo, carbon calculators, green consultants, satellite monitoring firms. There's optimism here. Technology is making carbon tracking more precise. AI models can map deforestation in real time. Drones survey tree health. Soil carbon is being tested with infrared sensors. Every tool helps, but the risk remains that we'll mistake measurement for solution. Scientists still debate the effectiveness of carbon markets. Some see them as essential tools for funding climate action. Others warn they can delay real reductions, allowing companies to buy their way to compliance without changing core behaviours. It's the difference between dieting and buying tighter pants. And then there's corporate net zero pledges. You float above glossy reports filled with phrases like science-based targets and carbon neutrality by 2050. These pledges often rely heavily on future offsets and technologies that don't yet exist at scale. Direct air capture, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, BECCS, even ocean alkalinity enhancement. The promises are big, the pathways uncertain, but the idea behind it all, the hope, is that by assigning carbon a value, we can finally treat it like what it is, a scarce resource, a cost to be managed, not ignored. If emitting carbon has a price, then maybe not emitting becomes profitable. Maybe balance becomes more than an aspiration. It becomes a business plan. You leave the boardroom now, numbers still echoing in your head. Outside, a sapling stands beside a parking lot, planted as part of a carbon offset campaign. Its leaves are small, its roots shallow, but it's real. It photosynthesizes just like the ancient oaks. It breathes in carbon, grows one ring at a time. It's not enough to cancel a factory, but it's something. And maybe that's where carbon markets can help, not as a cure, but as a tool. If used carefully, transparently, honestly, they can funnel money toward real climate solutions, but if used as a loophole, they only deepen the imbalance. You look at the sapling again. The paper certificate said it would offset your conference flight. Maybe it will, maybe not, but either way the tree grows, the carbon moves, the ledger is still open, and you, whether investor or idealist, remain part of the equation. You're suspended now above a world that's trying to fix itself, or maybe just trying not to break further. Below, carbon continues its relentless churn through breath and decay and fire. But above, the humans have begun something new. The normal cycle no longer feels sufficient. Now they're building machines, painting plans on desert sand, launching schemes that feel less like farming and more like science fiction. You've entered the realm of geoengineering, Earth-scale interventions that aim to manipulate carbon and climate alike. This is where desperation meets ingenuity. You drift into a lab filled with the gentle hum of fans, blinking consoles and glass chambers that sip air 1 litre at a time. Inside these chambers, direct air capture devices scrub carbon dioxide from the atmosphere using specialised filters. Once captured, the CO2 can be compressed and either buried underground or reused, perhaps to carbonate soda or grow greenhouse vegetables. It sounds hopeful. It's real, but it's also small. The world emits over 35 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide annually. These machines, as of now, remove only a few thousand. Still, they represent a turning point. Instead of trying to avoid emissions, we're now trying to reverse them. Pull carbon back from the sky and store it. Carbon removal as cleanup duty for centuries of industrial excess. The irony? It's wildly expensive, energy-intensive, and very slow. The carbon takes minutes to burn, but hours to remove and forever to store. You follow one of these captured carbon molecules into a basalt rock formation, injected deep underground where it will mineralize over time, becoming part of the stone itself. If it works, it will stay locked away for thousands of years. If it doesn't, it may leak or bubble up or simply be forgotten. Scientists still debate the risks of long-term storage. What if we build massive infrastructure to bury carbon, only to find the vaults aren't airtight? Next, you float into a brainstorming session. Not in a lab this time, but in a policy room where maps are spread on the table and terms like solar radiation management hang in the air. This is geoengineering's flashier sibling, climate intervention on a planetary scale. The idea? Reflect a small percentage of sunlight back into space to cool the Earth. Some propose spraying aerosols into the stratosphere to mimic volcanic eruptions. Others suggest giant mirrors in orbit, cloud brightening, or even painting roofs white worldwide. It's all technically possible. It's also terrifying. You imagine a world where we dim the sun to mask our emissions. A planet slightly cooler but dependent on constant intervention. If the spraying stops, the warming returns almost instantly. A scenario known as termination shock. Ecosystems might whiplash, rainfall patterns could change, global food systems could stutter. And who decides when to start, or stop, or take the blame? Here's a quirky twist. Some researchers have floated the idea of spreading powdered olivine, a green volcanic mineral, across beaches and farmland. As it weathers, it chemically reacts with CO2, pulling it from the air and locking it in rock. It's basically carbon removal by way of crushed crystal therapy. Sounds niche, but trials are underway. You swing past a massive kelp farm in the open ocean, rows of seaweed growing rapidly in vertical columns. Seaweed grows fast, absorbs carbon, and doesn't need fertilizer or fresh water. Some schemes propose sinking it to the deep ocean, sequestering the carbon for centuries. But others caution that the ecological impact is unclear. The ocean is not a blank slate. Sink enough seaweed and you might choke something else. Then there's that enhanced weathering, grinding certain types of rock into fine dust and spreading it across land to speed up natural carbon-absorbing reactions. It mimics the Earth's own mechanisms, just turbocharged, but the energy costs are steep and scaling it up would require mining, transport and massive logistical coordination. It's like trying to fix the planet with a leaf blower full of talcum powder. Scientists still debate the ethics of geoengineering. Is it a moral hazard, a distraction from reducing emissions, or a necessary backup plan if things spiral out of control? Supporters argue we need every tool available. There's no single solution to climate change. Critics warn of false hope and unintended consequences. The consensus? Proceed with caution, but don't look away. You drop into a startup lab where algae are being genetically modified to grow faster and absorb more carbon. Nearby, engineers are designing buildings that capture CO2 through concrete that hardens by absorbing the gas. Even sneakers and office chairs are being designed with carbon-capturing materials. It's not just engineering the planet, it's engineering everyday life to pull carbon, molecule by molecule, from our routines. But again, scale is the monster in the room. Removing carbon is hard. Removing enough to make a dent? Even harder. You'd need thousands of machines, forests the size of continents, global coordination, and time, so much time. Meanwhile, emissions keep rising. Carbon isn't just a substance, it's a clock, and the hands keep moving. You pause now in a field of mirrors, concentrated solar arrays reflecting sunlight into a central tower, generating electricity without burning a thing. Renewable energy is often left out of geoengineering conversations, but in a way, it's the simplest intervention. Stop emitting in the first place. No need to pull carbon if you never release it. The cleanest carbon capture is not making the mess to begin with. You ascend above the planet again. Below, wind farms spin, Direct air capture fans whir, satellites blink, and humans, earnest and anxious, continue to brainstorm their way out of a problem they created slowly, then suddenly. Geoengineering isn't just science, it's a mirror, showing us how far we'll go to avoid giving up what we think we need. But it's also hope, imperfect, maybe even risky, but driven by the same thing that drives every part of the carbon cycle: adaptation. The planet has always found a way. Now it's our turn. You find yourself now not in a lab or forest or machine hall, but somewhere softer, inside a story. A half-remembered myth, maybe, or a prayer spoken over a fire. You're in the realm of meaning now, where carbon isn't just an atom but a symbol. Across cultures and centuries, people have sensed its presence without knowing its name. They saw it in ash, in smoke, in breath, and they gave it power. Welcome to carbon's place in culture and myth, where science and spirit quietly shake hands. You're crouched beside a campfire. The flames flicker low and smoke curls upward into the stars. You watch the wood darken, char crumble. What's left behind is charcoal, pure, black carbon. To some ancient peoples, this was more than a byproduct. It was transformation. Fire took the living and left the elemental. Charcoal was sacred in many traditions, used in medicine, in ritual, in burial. In some African and indigenous American practices, it marked the boundary between worlds. You lift a handful of ash. It's light, grey, fragile, but full of meaning. In Hindu rituals, sacred ash, vibhuti, is applied to the forehead as a reminder of impermanence. From fire we come, and to ash we return. That's not just poetry, it's chemistry. The carbon in your body will one day be part of that same dust, that same cycle of return. Historians still argue whether ancient philosophies understood carbon as a unified concept. They didn't name it, but they spoke of elements: earth, air, fire, water, and carbon lives in all four. It's in the ground, the breath, the flame, and the rain. In Taoism, the balance of yin and yang is echoed in the carbon cycle itself: absorption and release, storage and motion. Balance not as a moment, but as a rhythm. You float now into an Egyptian tomb. The walls are painted with symbols of rebirth: the scarab, the sun, the field of reeds. Mummification, that elaborate act of preservation, was also a kind of carbon management. The body, dried and treated, was kept from decay. The carbon within it locked for centuries in linen and resin. Life paused. In many traditions, the soul breathes out, and what remains is the vessel, carbon made visible. In Greek myth, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Fire, the great transformer. With it came cooking, metallurgy, warmth, and combustion. In modern terms, he didn't just give us flame, he handed us a carbon lever, one we've been pulling ever since. And consider the word inspiration. It means to breathe in, breathe in. In many languages, breath and spirit are the same word. Ruach in Hebrew, pneuma in Greek, prana in Sanskrit. Every breath is a spiritual and biochemical act. You inhale oxygen, you exhale carbon dioxide. In spiritual terms, you give part of yourself to the world. In physical terms, you give carbon. Here's your quirky gem for tonight. In some parts of Europe, coal miners once believed that if a lump of coal glowed blue, it was a ghost. They weren't entirely wrong. Certain gases released from decaying organic matter can glow faintly in low oxygen conditions. A haunting shimmer from long-dead plants. Carbon, trying to tell a story. You wander now into a modern art gallery. On display, a sculpture made from compressed air pollution. Soot and carbon particles bound into something solid. Nearby, a poem speaks of breath, of smoke, of invisible lines connecting the living and the dead. Artists today are reimagining carbon not just as crisis, but as material, metaphor, reminder. It's in performance, in protest signs, in speculative fiction. Climate, grief and hope, moulded into verse and image. Even our languages hold traces of carbon's quiet omnipresence. Carbon copy, a carbon footprint, carbon-based life form. It's in our idioms, our economies, our understanding of self. You are not a person floating above the earth. You are of it. You are carbon, organised briefly into thought and muscle and memory. You sit now beside an elder telling a story. Maybe it's Inuit, maybe Maori, maybe from the Sahel or the Siberian tundra. In the story, animals speak, trees remember, The air carries the voices of ancestors. Science might call it metaphor, but you, drifting between molecules and myths, know it's more than that. Oral traditions have long recognized the interconnectedness we've only recently learned to model with satellites and spectrometers. In many indigenous worldviews, the idea of reciprocity is central. You don't just take, you give. You plant after you harvest. You thank the fish. You walk lightly. These are not carbon policies, but they function like them, living within limits, valuing what sustains you, understanding that everything cycles. Scientists still debate whether moral frameworks should guide climate policy. Should we appeal to ethics or economics? Should carbon have a cost or a consequence? Some argue for cold numbers, carbon pricing, market-based solutions. Others call for climate justice, ancestral rights, a reckoning with colonialism. The carbon cycle doesn't care, but people do. And in that care, there's power. You walk through a cathedral now, candles flicker, incense curls upward in slow spirals, carbon made holy. Someone kneels in silence. Their breath fogs the air for a moment, then disappears, but the carbon remains, mingling with ancient stone and stained glass, with the prayers of 1,000 mornings. Because carbon doesn't just build bodies and burn fuels, it carries memory. It moves through history, story, ritual. It links you to your ancestors, not metaphorically, but molecularly. A breath exhaled in Mesopotamia might still be drifting somewhere, passed from lung to leaf and back again. You exhale now, quietly. The breath leaves your lips and joins the air. It's just carbon, of course, but it's also part of a story older than language, and it's still being written. You're spiraling now, not through air or soil or bloodstream, but through the system itself, riding the momentum of a planet in feedback. The carbon has been released, the atmosphere thickened, and now Earth is responding, not in silence, but with echoes. You're caught in a loop of reaction, amplifications, accelerations. Welcome to the feedback loops of a warming world where one change sparks another and the carbon cycle begins to spin faster than it can stabilize. You descend into the Arctic where ice once stretched solid for thousands of miles. Now you see melt ponds, pale blue mirrors dotting the landscape. The ice is thinner, fractured. As it disappears, it reveals darker ocean water beneath, which absorbs more sunlight instead of reflecting it. Warmer water melts more ice. Less ice means more absorption. And so the loop tightens, albedo feedback, a mirror shattered into warming. Beneath the surface, the permafrost is slumping. Earth that once stayed frozen year-round is now softening, thawing, breathing out carbon dioxide and methane from once locked organic matter. That ancient carbon, some of it tens of thousands of years old, is now entering the cycle again. Not slowly, but all at once. Thaw leads to emissions, which lead to warming, which leads to more thaw. The ground is not stable. The past is no longer buried. Scientists still argue how quickly permafrost carbon will enter the atmosphere. Some models suggest a gradual release over centuries. Others warn of abrupt shifts, wetlands turning into carbon fountains, sudden methane plumes erupting from thaw lakes. What's clear is that the release has begun, and it's not just theoretical anymore. It's measurable. The breath of ancient peatlands has rejoined the present. You now hover over a rainforest, once a reliable carbon sink, but the rains have changed. Drier seasons last longer. Heatwaves roll in like waves of glass, trees die, drop leaves, lose their carbon stores, fires follow. The forest becomes patchier, its carbon capacity reduced. In some areas of the Amazon, measurements now show that more carbon is being emitted than absorbed. A sink turning into a source, a heartbreaking reversal. Elsewhere, warming soils stimulate microbial activity. Bacteria and fungi accelerate their metabolic processes, breaking down organic matter and releasing more CO2. Soils that once slowly released carbon now exhale it faster, especially during heat waves. In temperate zones, summer warming leads to larger soil respiration spikes, tiny exhales with planetary impact. You float into the ocean now, but even here the feedback is shifting. As surface waters warm, their ability to hold dissolved CO2 decreases, solubility feedback in action. Warmer water simply can't absorb as much gas. Meanwhile, stratification increases. Warm layers sit on top of cooler ones, preventing the deep mixing that brings nutrients up and allows plankton to flourish. Less plankton, less photosynthesis, less carbon drawn down. A quiet blue unravelling. Here's a quirky twist. In some regions, researchers have noticed that as trees grow faster due to rising CO2 levels, a phenomenon known as the CO2 fertilization effect, they also tend to die younger. Their tissues become less dense, they're more vulnerable to drought, pests, and fire. So while they take in more carbon up front, they may release it sooner through mortality. Fast growth, fast return. And speaking of fire, you ride the wind above Siberia, where wildfires have begun burning not just forests but peatlands, the deeply layered organic soils that hold vast carbon stores. These fires smoulder underground, impossible to fully extinguish, and they release carbon that's been stored since before the last ice age. One spark becomes many, one summer becomes a trend. Scientists still debate whether we've crossed certain tipping points, thresholds beyond which feedback loops self-perpetuate. The collapse of the Greenland ice sheet, the shutdown of the Atlantic Ocean circulation, the dieback of major rainforests. Are we approaching them? Are we past them? There's no red flashing line, just probabilities and models and signs, some subtle, some screaming. You turn now to the atmosphere itself. Higher CO2 concentrations increase temperatures, which in turn alter weather patterns. Warmer air holds more moisture, leading to heavier rainfall events in some places, and worse droughts in others. Droughts weaken vegetation. Weak vegetation absorbs less carbon. Fires follow, and the cycle continues. Carbon isn't just in the atmosphere, it shapes it. It modulates the very forces we used to call weather. And with warming comes human feedback too. In response to hotter summers, we turn on more air conditioning, powered often by fossil fuels. In response to agricultural stress, we clear more land, often forest, to expand food production, releasing more carbon in the process. Our efforts to cope with the symptoms can unintentionally worsen the cause. Still, not all feedback is runaway. Some systems resist. Forests in certain regions are showing surprising resilience. Seagrasses continue to absorb carbon even in stressed environments. In Iceland, basalt formations sequester carbon naturally with little fanfare. And peatlands, if re-wetted, can quickly flip back to carbon sinks. The Earth's systems are not passive victims. They adjust, react, adapt, sometimes better than expected. But adaptation takes time, and the rate of carbon emissions has outpaced many of these natural responses. The feedback loops are speeding up. What once took millennia now takes decades. What once felt abstract now feels close. Wildfires choke city skies. Drought shrinks lakes. Coral reefs bleach and crumble. Carbon is no longer invisible. It's everywhere. It's personal. You pause now, hovering between one loop and the next. The cycle is still a cycle, but the tempo has changed. It's jazzier now, unpredictable, with rising crescendos and sudden silences. You wonder if this is what tipping points sound like, less like a siren, more like a shift in rhythm. And here's the quiet truth. Feedbacks don't mean doom, they mean acceleration. And with acceleration comes the need for new balances, new behaviours, new intentions. The system isn't collapsing, it's recalibrating. It's testing how much carbon it can carry before it starts rewriting the rules. So you keep moving, through loops, through heat, through questions with no single answer. You watch the carbon circle bend, stretch and ripple, knowing that the story isn't over. It's just running a little faster than before. And now, finally, you return to yourself. After drifting through fire and fungus, factories and forests, myth and feedback loop, you settle back into the soft shape of your own body. You take a slow breath in, cool, ordinary, and then a breath out. Invisible, but not insignificant. That single exhale contains more than just moisture and warmth. It carries carbon, freshly liberated from your lunch, your thoughts, your pulse. This is your carbon shadow, the faint but steady imprint you leave on the world just by being here. You glance around your life and start to see it. The carbon in your shoes, likely synthetic. The carbon in your phone in its plastic casing and the electricity used to charge it. The carbon in your fridge full of berries flown in from another continent. Your car key, your morning scroll through the internet powered by distant data centers. You are a node in the network, both emitter and reservoir. You are in every possible sense part of the cycle. You shift your awareness inward now. Carbon is the backbone of your biochemistry. It forms the chains of amino acids, the rungs of your DNA, the structure of every lipid, sugar and enzyme. It links atoms like Velcro, never flashy but always dependable. Without carbon, you would be a puddle of unconnected elements. With it, you're thinking, moving, remembering the way coffee smells or how rain feels on skin. Historians still argue about when the human carbon footprint became a problem. Was it the coal-powered factories of the 19th century? The mass adoption of cars? The Green Revolution's fossil-fueled fertilizers? Or was it earlier still when we first tamed fire, first cleared forests with stone axes? Maybe the answer isn't one moment, but a slow crescendo. A gathering of decisions, each small on its own, but cumulative over centuries. You walk now through your daily choices, not with guilt, but with a kind of quiet curiosity. Your morning coffee, grown on a farm that may or may not be regeneratively managed. Your lunch, packaged in plastic, likely transported hundreds of miles. Your online order, the trucks, the warehouse lights, the packaging tape. Each action traces a thread, a carbon ripple outward and onward. But it's not just about footprints, it's about flows. Your carbon shadow isn't just a measure of harm, it's a record of participation. You breathe, you move, you connect, you build. Even if you never drive a car or board a plane, you're still part of the web. And that's not a flaw, it's a feature of being alive. Here's your last quirky carbon fact. The average human exhales about 2 pounds of carbon dioxide every day just by existing. That means over a year, your body alone releases about 730 pounds of CO2, not including the emissions from your lifestyle, just your metabolism. You could sit in a cave in absolute silence and still be part of the carbon cycle. You can't opt out, but you can show up differently. You pause beside a compost pile, a bike rack, a garden bed with sunflowers growing tall, not as symbols of perfection, but as little sites of carbon choreography, a place where choices change outcomes. When you reduce waste, eat more plants, or support reforestation, you nudge the flow, maybe only slightly, but in a cycle this vast, slight is still something. You hear the debates echoing, how much does personal action matter? Isn't it up to governments, corporations, billionaires with rocket-shaped hobbies? Scientists still debate the math, but the principle holds. Systems change, or when the stories we tell ourselves begin to shift. You're not just a consumer, you're a participant. You don't fix the carbon cycle alone, but you help write the new version of it. And this new version? It's already emerging. In neighborhoods where rooftops gleam with solar panels, in cities where trees are being planted with intention, not just aesthetics. In schools where kids learn that the air they breathe is connected to the coral reefs, to the tundra, to the soil under their feet. In farms where carbon isn't an enemy, but a partner. The cycle isn't broken, it's waking up. You take another breath, the carbon in it might have been part of Cleopatra's breath, or a leaf in the Jurassic, or a puff of whale spout above Antarctic waves. It might be in a tree next year, or in a mushroom, or in another person. Maybe someone you'll never meet. Maybe someone watching this video right now. And in that breath you find a strange kind of comfort. You are not outside nature. You are not an interruption to the cycle. You are the cycle, one small swirl in the greater pattern, one moving part in a world that has always, and will always, be made of transformation. The carbon in your body came from stars, from plants, from old air. It will leave you when you exhale, when you decay, when you return to the ground. And it will become something else, not lost, not wasted, just changed. And so you whisper to yourself as the cycle continues. Breathe in, breathe out, in, carbon out. Life one loop at a time. And now we slow things down. You've wandered through forests and factories, drifted over oceans and deserts, breathed with mushrooms and satellites. You've followed carbon from stars to soil to supermarket shelves and back again. And through all of it, every twist, every transformation, you've stayed grounded in something incredibly simple. Breath. That gentle rhythm in and out, carbon moving quietly with each heartbeat. So as you lie here now, maybe under a blanket or with a fan humming gently nearby, you start to notice how still things feel. Not because the world has stopped moving, but because you're finally moving at its pace. Slow, cyclical, measured. Everything finds its place eventually, even you. The carbon you exhale tonight might one day settle into a blade of grass, or drift through the canopy of a rainforest, or settle into ocean sediment, whispering stories in the dark. And someday, maybe far from now, it will re-emerge, as a molecule, as a tree ring, as a breeze. No part of you is ever really lost, just reimagined. So rest easy now. You've travelled far, but the cycle carries on, quietly, gently, steadily. Carbon is still moving, but you don't have to. Not right now. Let the molecules do the work. Let the earth turn on its own. Let yourself disappear for a little while into something bigger than words. Just breathe.